The emergency beacon pulsed through subspace like a dying heartbeat. Ambassador Killar watched the display with all four of his eyes, his delicate fingers trembling as they hovered over the communication panel. The decision had already been made, but that did not make it any easier to accept. His people, the Venathi, had exhausted every other option. Their colony on Rebus 7 was dying, and they needed help from the only species in the galaxy that might be able to provide it. Earth, the Deathworld, home to the humans. Killar's assistant, a young Venathi named Tessic, approached with careful steps. The floor of their station was designed to be soft, cushioned, safe. Everything in Venathi society was built around safety. They had evolved on a gentle world where the most dangerous predator was barely larger than Killar's hand, where storms were rare whispers of wind, where the very concept of violence was academic rather than practical. Ambassador, the other council members are asking if you've reconsidered, Tessic said softly. His voice carried the musical quality all Venathi possessed, though it wavered with fear. They say the price of human intervention might be too high. Killar turned away from the console. Through the wide viewport, he could see Rebus 7 below, a world that should have been paradise. The Venathi had chosen it carefully, as they chose all their colonies. Gentle gravity, stable climate, no major predators, rich soil. But they had not accounted for the scourge. None of them had. The crystalline parasites had appeared 6 months ago, spreading through the colony's infrastructure like a disease. They consumed metal, silicon, anything refined or processed. They grew in the walls, in the equipment, in the very bones of the settlement. Worse, they were intelligent. Not conscious, but intelligent enough to adapt, to learn, to hunt. 300 Venathi had already died, a number that represented a catastrophe for a species that numbered barely 2 billion across a dozen worlds. The scourge had learned to target life support systems, medical facilities, communication arrays. It was as if the parasites understood that removing these things would kill more efficiently than any direct attack. I have not reconsidered, Killar said finally. We have no choice. The containment fields are failing. Our weapons do not work. Our scientists cannot find a solution. If we do not get help within a standard week, everyone on Rebus 7 will be dead. But humans, Ambassador, humans. Tessic's voice dropped to barely a whisper, as if speaking the word too loudly might summon them. I have read the reports from other species. The Calvoth who hired human mercenaries to end their civil war, and then spent decades recovering from the trauma of watching them fight. The Dren who asked for human security consultants and nearly had a cultural collapse when they learned what humans considered acceptable risk. Ambassador, they come from a world where everything wants to kill them, where the weather itself can be lethal, where they evolved alongside apex predators and then became the apex predator. They hunt for sport. They intentionally place themselves in danger for entertainment. They have a concept called extreme sports that involves nearly dying on purpose. Killar knew all of this. He had spent months studying humanity before making his decision. The research had not made him feel better. Humans lived on a world they themselves called harsh. Their planet spun through space in a region filled with radiation and debris. Their moon was enormous, creating tides that could crush the unwary. Their weather system spawned storms that could level cities. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis. The list of ways Earth tried to kill its inhabitants was longer than the list of known Venathi colonies. And yet humans thrived. More than thrived. They had reached the stars with a savage determination that frightened other species. Where the Venathi had taken 12,000 years to develop spaceflight, carefully and safely advancing their technology, humans had done it in less than 300. Where the Venathi established colonies only after decades of study and preparation, humans simply landed and adapted. Their motto seemed to be that if something did not kill them, they would learn to live with it. And if it did try to kill them, they would kill it back. I know what they are, Killar said quietly. That is why I am calling them. The scourge will not respond to gentle methods. It will not be reasoned with or carefully contained. It is a threat that requires a response we cannot provide. We need survivors of a Deathworld, Tessic. We need people who understand what it means to fight to live. Tessic said nothing more. There was nothing more to say. Killar turned back to the console and entered the final authorization code. The message was simple, broadcast on all frequencies known to reach Earth's communication network. It contained the location of Rebus 7, the nature of the emergency, and a formal request for assistance under the Galactic Mutual Aid Treaty. The treaty that humanity had signed 20 years ago when they had finally been accepted into the wider community of spacefaring species. The response came faster than Killar had expected, much faster. Within 6 standard hours, a human vessel dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Rebus 7 system. Killar watched the sensor display with a mixture of relief and dread as the ship approached. It was not a large vessel by human standards, but it moved with a purposeful speed that made his heart race. Venathi's ships drifted through space like leaves on water, gentle and careful. This human ship cut through the void like a blade. This is the UESS Perseverance responding to distress call from Rebus 7, a voice said over the communication channel. It was female, strong, clipped. The translator struggled slightly with the consonants, but the meaning was clear. We're a rapid response unit out of the Frontier Service. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanding. We've reviewed your situation brief and we're ready to assist. Requesting permission to approach the station. Quillar's primary hands moved across the console while his secondary hands steadied his shaking body. Permission granted, Captain Rodriguez. We are desperate for your help. Understood, Ambassador. We'll dock in 20 minutes. Fair warning, we're bringing equipment and personnel that might seem excessive to you. Try not to be alarmed. We take contamination scenarios seriously. The connection ended. Quillar looked at Tessic, who had gone pale, his skin losing its usual violet hue. Excessive? Tessic repeated. What do they consider excessive? They found out when the Perseverance docked. The airlock opened, and humans emerged wearing armor. Not the light protective suits that Venathi used for hazardous environments, but actual armor, heavy and dark, covered in equipment that Quillar could not identify. Their faces were hidden behind helmets with glowing displays. Each human carried weapons, multiple weapons. Quillar counted at least 3 per individual, and those were just the ones he could see. Captain Rodriguez removed her helmet as she stepped onto the station. She was tall, as most humans were, with dark hair pulled back severely from her face. Her eyes were brown, hard, scanning the room with the intensity of someone who expected threats to emerge from anywhere. She looked at Quillar and something in her expression softened slightly. Ambassador Quillar, I presume, she said, extending a hand. It took Quillar a moment to remember the human greeting. He placed his primary hand in hers, trying not to flinch at the warmth and strength of her grip. Humans ran hot, their metabolisms burning like furnaces compared to the cooler Venathi. Their grip was firm, controlled, but he could feel the power in her fingers. She could crush his hand without effort if she chose. Captain Rodriguez, Killar said, thank you for responding so quickly. We were already in the sector, she replied. Lucky timing. I've got 40 personnel on my ship, all experienced with hostile environment operations. I need a full briefing on the scourge. Everything you know, everything you've tried, and current containment status. She paused, studying him. You look scared, Ambassador. I'm not going to tell you not to be. We're here to handle something you can't, and that's always frightening. But I will tell you this. We've dealt with worse than crystal parasites. We'll get your people out safely. Killar wanted to believe her, but his research into humanity had taught him to be cautious. Captain, I must ask, your methods. We have heard stories. The Calvoth Civil War, The Dren's security incident. Humans have a reputation for solving problems with a level of violence that many species find disturbing. Rodriguez did not look offended. Instead, she nodded. You're worried we'll cause as much damage as the Scourge. Valid concern. Let me be straight with you, Ambassador. Yes, we're going to use methods that will seem extreme. We're going to employ tactics that will make you uncomfortable. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day in 1,000 different ways, and we survived by learning to hit back harder than we got hit. But we're not mindless brutes. We're professionals. We know the difference between necessary force and excessive force. We know how to protect civilians. We know how to minimize collateral damage. The Calvoth situation was a civil war. The Dren hired us to stop a criminal organization that had weapons they didn't know how to counter. Both times we did exactly what we were hired to do. And yes, both times our employers were shocked by what they saw, because they'd never seen what real fighting looks like. She stepped closer, and Killar fought the instinct to step back. The Scourge is killing your people. It's intelligent enough to target your weaknesses. It's spreading despite your containment efforts. You need someone who understands how to fight something that fights back. That's us. That's what Deathworlders do. We don't just survive, Ambassador. We win. But winning has a cost, and that cost is that you're going to see things that frighten you. You're going to watch us do things that seem cruel or excessive. And at the end of it, you're going to understand why other species have complicated feelings about asking Earth for help. Killar felt all four of his eyes widen. This was the price. Not money, not resources, not political favor. The price was bearing witness to what Deathworld survivors were capable of when they stopped holding back. The price was learning what it meant to fight, truly fight, for survival. I understand, he said softly. Or at least I think I do. Rodriguez smiled, but it was not a gentle expression. You will, Ambassador. You will. She turned to her team. Jenkins, Yamamoto, Kowalski, with me. Full survey gear. Everyone else, standard lockdown protocols. Nobody goes anywhere alone, and I want motion trackers active at all times. Treat this like a hostile environment until proven otherwise. She looked back at Killar. Let's go see what we're dealing with. The team moved with practiced efficiency through the station. Killar led them toward the contaminated sections, trying not to stare at the way the humans moved. They did not walk like Venathi, carefully and with consideration for their surroundings. They moved with purpose, with awareness, constantly scanning, hands never far from their weapons. It was like watching predators stalk through territory, and Killar was reminded viscerally that humans had not always been at the top of Earth's food chain. They had climbed there, fighting every step of the way. The first Scourge growth they encountered was in a maintenance corridor. The crystalline structures had spread across the walls like a metallic infection, pulsing with a faint inner light. They had consumed the original wall plating and were now reaching toward the power conduits. Killar explained what he knew, how the Scourge seemed to sense vibrations, how it adapted to their attempts at removal, how it grew faster when attacked with the wrong methods. Rodriguez crouched near the growth, studying it with an intensity that made Killar nervous. She produced a device from her armor and took readings, then carefully reached out and broke off a small crystal. The Scourge immediately reacted, the surrounding crystals vibrating and beginning to grow toward her hand. She pulled back smoothly, sealing the sample in a containment unit. Fascinating, she murmured. It's sensing movement and heat. And you're right, it's learning. I can see where you tried cutting tools, plasma torches, chemical solvents. It's adapted defenses against all of them. She stood. But it's never encountered humans before. It doesn't know what we're capable of. What do you mean? Killar asked. Rodriguez looked at him, and for a moment her expression was almost sad. It's learned to defend against Venathi methods, safe methods, careful methods, methods designed not to cause collateral damage. But Ambassador, we're not Venathi. We're from a world where forest fires are part of the ecosystem, where volcanoes create new land, where sometimes the only way to stop a disease is to burn it out entirely, no matter how much it hurts. The Scourge thinks it knows how to survive. It's about to learn it's never faced a real threat before. Over the next several hours, the human team conducted a thorough survey of the contamination. They went places the Venathi had deemed too dangerous, pushed into spaces where the Scourge growth was heaviest, took samples and readings with an almost casual disregard for personal safety that made Quillar's skin crawl. When one of the humans, Jenkins, was nearly caught by a sudden growth surge that shot crystal spikes toward his arm, he simply moved faster than the attack, laughed, and said something about it being not even close. Not even close. The Scourge had moved fast enough that Quillar had barely seen it, and Jenkins had dismissed it as not even close. What kind of reflexes did these Deathworlders possess? Captain Rodriguez finally called her team back to a safe area. She pulled up holographic displays showing the full extent of the contamination, and Quillar felt his heart sink. The Scourge had spread further than the Venathi had realized, infiltrating systems throughout the colony. There were growths in the water processing, in the air recycling, in the power distribution. The colony was being consumed from within. "It's bad," Rodriguez said bluntly. "Worse than your initial assessment. At current growth rates, you've got maybe 4 days before critical systems fail completely. The good news is, it's still contained to the colony. None of the Scourge has made it onto ships or spread to other locations. That's what we need to preserve. Full containment, no matter what." "Can you save the colony?" Quillar asked, dreading the answer. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "We can save your people. All of them. Get them off safely. The colony itself?" She shook her head. "The Scourge has integrated too deeply into the infrastructure. To remove it completely, we'd have to dismantle everything, and we don't have time. There's another option, but you're not going to like it." "Tell me." "We sterilize the site, complete thermal purge. We evacuate everyone, seal the colony, and then we introduce a controlled burn that reaches temperatures high enough to reduce the Scourge to slag. It'll destroy the colony, but it'll also ensure the Scourge doesn't spread. Nothing survives that kind of heat. Not the parasites, not their spores, nothing. It's final, and it's certain." Quillar felt something break inside him. The colony on Rebus 7 had taken 70 years to build. 70 years of careful planning, of transporting materials, of slowly and safely establishing a new home. Thousands of Venathi had devoted their lives to its creation, and now this human was calmly proposing to burn it all to ash. "There must be another way," he said desperately. "The cultural loss, the resources, the time invested, we cannot simply destroy it all." Rodriguez's expression was understanding but firm. "Ambassador, I know this is hard, but I need you to listen carefully. The Scourge is intelligent enough to adapt and spread. If even a single spore escapes, it could infect other worlds. Your people live on gentle planets, perfect breeding grounds for something like this. It could spread through your entire civilization. We're not just talking about one colony, we're talking about potentially billions of lives. On Earth, we have a saying, sometimes you have to burn the village to save it. It sounds cruel, and it is, but it's also necessary." She pulled up another display. "Here's what I'm proposing. We do a full evacuation over the next 48 hours. My team will set up safe corridors and extraction points. We get every single Venathi off the surface safely. Then we deploy thermal charges throughout the contaminated zones. We seal the colony, evacuate to a safe distance, and we trigger a synchronized burn. The heat will propagate through the entire structure. In 6 hours, the Scourge will be gone, completely, and Rebus 7 can be decontaminated and eventually rebuilt." 6 hours to erase 70 years of work, Quillar said hollowly. 6 hours to save billions of lives, Rodriguez countered. "Ambassador, this is what I meant about the price. You called us because you needed someone who could do what you couldn't. Well, this is it. This is what Deathworlders do. We make the hard choices. We do the terrible things that need doing. We live with the consequences. Your people, your culture, you're not built for this kind of decision. You're builders, creators, careful gardeners of safe worlds. That's beautiful. That's something we honestly admire about species like yours. But when the garden gets a weed that won't stop growing, that's spreading poison, you need someone who knows how to use fire. Kilar looked at the displays, at the colony that was dying anyway. He thought about the 300 Venathi who had already died. He thought about the thousands still down there, terrified, waiting for salvation. He thought about the other colonies, the gentle worlds where his people lived in peace, in safety. He thought about what would happen if the scourge spread. And he understood. This was the price. Not just watching humans work, not just witnessing their violence. The price was giving permission. The price was saying, yes. The price was accepting responsibility for the choice to ask Deathworlders for help, and then standing by while they did what Deathworlders do. Do it, he said quietly. Save my people and burn the rest. Rodriguez nodded. We'll make it quick and clean. And Ambassador, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know this hurts. You are not sorry enough to find another way, Kilar said, and he did not mean it as an insult, simply as an observation. No, Rodriguez agreed, because there is no other way, not if you want to be certain. And when it comes to containing threats that could spread, certainty is worth any price. The evacuation began within an hour. The humans moved through the colony like they had done this 1,000 times before. And perhaps they had. They established safe routes, marked contaminated zones, and organized the terrified Venathi with calm efficiency. When the scourge tried to interfere, growing barriers and closing passages, the humans simply changed tactics. They used explosives to create new routes. They cut through walls with tools that made the Venathi technology seem like toys. They moved people in groups, protecting them with their armored bodies when necessary. Kilar watched from the station as shuttles rose from the colony's surface, each one carrying frightened Venathi to safety. The operation was proceeding exactly as Rodriguez had promised. Not a single casualty, not a single mistake. The humans worked with a precision that was almost machine-like. But there was something else too, something that took Kilar time to identify. They were kind. Despite their armor, despite their weapons, despite their terrifying competence, they were gentle with the Venathi. They helped the elderly, they carried children, they spoke in soft voices that the translators rendered as reassuring. These Deathworlders, these survivors of a planet that had tried to kill them, were showing more care for his people than the scourge had shown malice. It was confusing, contradictory, and it made Kilar realize that he had understood humans even less than he had thought. They were capable of terrible things, yes. They could make the hard choices, could burn colonies and fight wars, and embrace violence in ways that made other species recoil. But they were also capable of this, of carefully carrying a frightened child to safety, of staying calm while others panicked, of putting their bodies between civilians and danger without hesitation. Maybe that was the real secret of Deathworld survivors. They knew how to be both gentle and brutal, depending on what was needed. They had learned to carry both instincts inside themselves and to choose which one to act on. It was not that they lacked compassion. It was that they understood sometimes compassion meant doing things that seemed uncompassionate to preserve something greater. The evacuation took 36 hours. When the last shuttle lifted off, carrying the final group of Venathi to safety, Kilar felt a weight settle on his shoulders. Below, the colony stood empty. Streets that had bustled with life were silent. Buildings that had housed families stood abandoned. The scourge continued its slow consumption, unaware that its food source was gone, unaware of what was coming. Captain Rodriguez appeared beside him at the viewport. She had removed her helmet again, and Kilar could see the tiredness in her face. She had not rested during the entire evacuation. "Last team is pulling back now," she said. Charges are set. Will detonate in 2 hours. Give everyone time to reach safe distance. Will anyone else arrive before then? Kilar asked. Others who should witness? No, Rodriguez said. The Venathi who were down there know what's happening. They understand. That's enough. There's no need to make this a spectacle. They stood in silence for a while, watching the colony in its final hours. Kilar tried to memorize the sight, the way the buildings caught the sunlight, the pattern of streets, in parks, in plazas. 70 years of work, about to become ash. He wanted to feel angry at Rodriguez, at the humans, at their willingness to destroy, but he could not. She had been right. There had been no other way. The only question was whether he would have been strong enough to see it without her. On Earth, Rodriguez said quietly, we have a practice called controlled burning. In forests, in grasslands, in ecosystems where fire is natural, we deliberately set fires to clear out dead growth, invasive species, disease. It seems destructive, but it's necessary. The fires clear the way for new growth, healthy growth. The ecosystem recovers stronger than before. She looked at Kilar. Revis 7 can be rebuilt. Ambassador, better than before now that you know what to watch for. This isn't an ending. It's a clearing of ground for something new. You make it sound almost hopeful, Kilar said. Because it is, Rodriguez replied. You called us expecting monsters, expecting humans to solve your problem with brutality and violence and nothing else. But that's not who we are. We're survivors, yes. We know how to fight, how to destroy when necessary. But we also know how to rebuild. Earth has been devastated dozens of times in our history. Natural disasters, wars, plagues. Every time we survived. Every time we rebuilt. That's the real lesson of Deathworld's ambassador. Not that they make you hard, that they teach you resilience. They teach you that destruction is sometimes necessary, but it's never final. There's always something after, always a chance to grow again. The detonation, when it came, was beautiful in a terrible way. The charges went off in sequence, creating waves of fire that swept through the colony. The scourge burned, its crystalline structures melting and then vaporizing in the intense heat. Within minutes, the careful buildings, the gentle streets, the safe haven the Venathi had built were reduced to glowing slag. The fire was thorough, merciless, total. Nothing survived. Nothing could survive. Kilar watched with all four eyes, forcing himself not to look away. This was the price. This was what he had agreed to when he sent the SOS to Earth. And Rodriguez stood beside him, silent witness to the destruction her people had unleashed, neither celebrating nor mourning, simply present, simply certain that this had been necessary. When the fires finally died and the colony was nothing but cooling ruins, Rodriguez turned to him. The decontamination teams will confirm total elimination of the scourge, but I'm confident. It's done. Your people are safe. The threat is contained. At what cost? Kilar asked, though he already knew. At the cost it always takes, Rodriguez said. Safety purchased with sacrifice. Security bought with destruction. It's not pleasant. It's not neat, but it works. And in the end, that's what matters. Your people survive. They can rebuild. The scourge is gone forever. She paused, then added, You're going to have a choice now, Ambassador. How you frame this to your people. You can tell them humans are dangerous, destructive, a last resort to be feared. And you wouldn't be wrong. But you can also tell them humans are effective, reliable, and capable of doing what's necessary to save lives. That wouldn't be wrong either. Both things are true. Kilar considered this. His people would want answers. They would want to know why their colony was destroyed. They would question whether it had been necessary, whether there had been alternatives, whether calling humans had been wise. And Kilar would have to stand before them and explain. He would have to bear witness to what he had seen, to the price that had been paid. I will tell them, he said slowly, that we called for help, and help came. I will tell them that humans did exactly what we asked them to do. They saved us. I will tell them that yes, the cost was high, but I will also tell them that had we not called, the cost would have been infinitely higher. And I will tell them that if I had to make the choice again, knowing everything I know now, I would make the same decision. Rodriguez smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. That's the wisdom of survivors talking, Ambassador. Welcome to understanding what it means to live on a death world. Every day is a choice between bad options and worse ones. Every day is calculating costs and accepting consequences. Every day is doing what needs to be done, even when it hurts. Your people will learn this now. It won't be easy, but it will make them stronger. In the days that followed, as the Venathi began the long process of planning Rivas 7's reconstruction, Kilar found himself thinking about Rodriguez's words. The humans departed after confirming the scourge was completely eliminated, leaving behind detailed reports and recommendations. They did not ask for excessive payment, did not demand special concessions. They had done the job they were hired for and then left, quiet and professional. But their impact remained. The Venathi who had been evacuated told stories of the humans who had saved them, stories of armored figures who had seemed terrifying at first, but had proven gentle and patient. Stories of humans who had run toward danger rather than away from it, who had put themselves at risk without hesitation. The children especially remembered. They drew pictures of the humans in their armor, made them into heroes of adventure tales. The fear that had existed before meeting humans was being replaced by something more complex. Respect, gratitude, and yes, still some fear, but tempered now with understanding. Kilar received reports from other Venathi colonies. Word of what had happened at Rivas 7 had spread, and reactions were mixed. Some called the destruction excessive, argued that more time could have found a gentler solution. Others, especially those who worked in biological or ecological sciences, understood immediately why the humans had acted as they had. The debate would likely continue for years. That was good. Debate meant thinking, and thinking meant learning. But Kilar also received private messages from ambassadors of other species. The Kalvov sent condolences and understanding, noting that they too had learned the price of asking humans for help. The Dren sent a simple message, now you know. Others, species that Kilar had never dealt with before, sent queries. What had it been like? How had the humans behaved? Would the Venathi recommend working with Earth again? That last question was the most important, and Kilar spent days considering his answer. Finally, he composed a response that he sent to all who had asked. It read, calling humans for help is not a decision to make lightly. They come from a world that most species would consider uninhabitable. They have been shaped by constant danger, constant challenge, constant need to survive against odds that would destroy gentler species. This makes them capable of things we cannot do. It also makes them willing to do things we would not choose to do. If you call them, they will solve your problem. They will do it efficiently, effectively, and with minimal loss of life. But they will solve it their way, which may involve destruction, violence, and methods that will disturb you. The price of asking Deathworld survivors for help is not measured in currency or favors. It is measured in witnessing what Deathworld survivors are capable of, and in accepting responsibility for unleashing that capability. Is it worth it? That depends on your situation. For us, it was. Our people lived because humans were willing to do what we could not. Our colony was destroyed, yes, but it can be rebuilt. Our people cannot be replaced. So yes, I would recommend working with Earth, but only if you are prepared for the consequences. Only if you are ready to see what it truly means to be from a death world. Only if you can accept that saving lives sometimes requires destroying the things we built those lives around. The message was distributed widely. It became something of a standard reference for species considering whether to request human assistance. And slowly humans became known not just as dangerous deathworlders, but as a last resort that worked. When all else failed, when the situation was desperate, when gentle methods had been exhausted, you called Earth, and Earth answered. 3 years after the Rivas 7 incident, Killar was invited to Earth for a diplomatic conference. He had never visited a Deathworld before, had never even considered it. The thought of standing on a planet where the weather could kill, where predators still existed, where the very ground could shake and split open, was terrifying. But he accepted the invitation. He needed to understand. He needed to see where these survivors came from. The journey to Earth's solar system took 2 weeks. As they approached, Quillar studied the planet through sensors and displays. It was beautiful, he had to admit. The swirl of white clouds, the blue of vast oceans, the green and brown of continents. It looked peaceful from space. Deceptive. The shuttle ride down to the surface was the most frightening thing Quillar had ever experienced. The shuttle shook as it entered the atmosphere. Wind buffeted them. Rain lashed the windows. Quillar watched the pilot, a human woman who looked barely concerned, humming softly to herself as she navigated through conditions that would have grounded any Banathi craft. When they landed at the spaceport in a city called Geneva, Quillar's legs were unsteady as he descended the ramp. The gravity was heavier than he was used to. Not crushing, but noticeable. Every step required more effort. The air was thicker, richer with oxygen than Banathi worlds. His first breath felt like it burned his lungs. And there was noise. Everywhere, noise. Wind in trees, the distant rumble of thunder, the calls of animals he could not identify. On Banathi worlds, silence was common, cherished. Here, the planet itself seemed alive with sound. Captain Rodriguez met him at the spaceport. She was out of armor now, wearing a simple uniform, but she still moved with that predator grace. She smiled when she saw him. "Ambassador Quillar, welcome to Earth. I hope the flight down wasn't too rough." "That was gentle weather?" Quillar asked weakly. Rodriguez laughed. "That was a light spring rain. You should see a real storm." She escorted him to ground transportation, a vehicle that moved fast along smooth roads. Quillar watched the landscape pass, trying to process what he was seeing. Earth was crowded with life. Trees everywhere, plants of thousands of varieties, animals moving through underbrush and flying through the air. He saw a bird swoop down and catch something small in its talons. A kill happening right there in the open, and none of the humans around even reacted. This was normal to them, death and life existing side by side. "I've been thinking about your message," Rodriguez said as they drove. "The one you sent out to other species about working with humans. It was fair, accurate. I appreciate that you didn't paint us as either heroes or monsters, just as what we are." "What you are is complex," Killar said. "I did not understand that before meeting you. I thought Deathworlders would be simple, brutal, but you are not. You are gentle when you can be, and harsh when you must be. You carry both natures inside you." "That's survival," Rodriguez said. "You can't be only one thing and survive on a planet like Earth. You have to adapt, be flexible, know when to be soft and when to be hard. It's exhausting sometimes, honestly, having to constantly calibrate your response to match the situation, but it's kept us alive." They arrived at the conference center, a building that looked sturdy enough to withstand a siege. Rodriguez explained it had been built to handle earthquakes, floods, and other natural disasters. Because on Earth, buildings that couldn't handle disasters didn't last. Everything here was built with destruction in mind. It was fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. The conference itself was enlightening. Representatives from dozens of species, all learning to work with humans, all sharing experiences. Killar spoke about Rivas 7, and others shared similar stories. The common thread was always the same. Humans were effective but unsettling. They got results, but the methods troubled those who witnessed them. And yet, species kept calling Earth, kept asking for help, because when the situation was truly desperate, humans delivered. On the last day of the conference, Rodriguez took Kilar on a tour of the surrounding area. She showed him a forest, explaining how it had been devastated by fire 30 years ago and had since regrown. She showed him a river that flooded every spring and how humans had built around the floods rather than trying to stop them. She showed him a memorial to people who had died in an earthquake and explained how the city had been rebuilt stronger than before. "This is what Earth teaches us," she said, standing on a hillside overlooking the city. "Everything can be destroyed. Everything will be destroyed eventually. Weather, time, disasters, they all take their toll. But destruction isn't the end. It's just change. What matters is what you do after, how you rebuild, how you learn, how you become stronger. That's why we were able to help you at Rivas 7, Ambassador. Not because we're cruel enough to burn a colony, because we understand that sometimes burning is necessary for new growth. We've lived that lesson our entire existence." Kilar looked out over the city at the millions of humans going about their lives on a world that could kill them at any moment. They built anyway. They lived anyway. They thrived anyway. And when other species called for help, they answered, bringing with them all the hard lessons their world had taught them. "I understand now," Kilar said quietly, "the price of calling Earth. It is not just seeing what you can do, it is learning why you can do it. It is understanding that survival sometimes requires accepting destruction. It is growing beyond our gentle ways and learning to be harder when necessary. You are teaching us, all of us who ask for your help, teaching us the lessons of Deathworlds, whether we want to learn them or not." "And is it a lesson you regret learning?" Rodriguez asked. Kilar thought of the 300 Venathi who had died before the humans arrived. He thought of the thousands who had been saved. He thought of the colony, destroyed but being rebuilt. He thought of his people, changed by their encounter with Deathworld survivors, learning to be stronger, more resilient, less fragile. The old Venathi culture, the gentle one, would never be quite the same. But perhaps that was not entirely a bad thing. Perhaps learning that they could survive harder things, endure more, choose destruction when necessary to preserve life. Perhaps that was growth. "No," he said finally, "I do not regret it. It is a hard lesson, but a necessary one. The galaxy is not as safe as we pretended it was. Threats exist that do not respond to gentle methods. Having allies who understand that, who can act when we cannot, that is valuable, even if it means accepting that those allies will frighten us sometimes." Rodriguez nodded, looking satisfied. "Then the price was paid fairly. You got what you needed, and you understood what it cost. That's all we ever ask. We don't want other species to become like us. Your gentle ways are valuable too. The galaxy needs both kinds, builders and destroyers, gardeners and warriors, soft hearts and hard choices. Working together, we're stronger than either alone." As Kilar prepared to leave Earth, he carried with him a new understanding. Humans were Deathworld survivors, yes. They were capable of terrible things when necessary, but they were also teachers, whether they meant to be or not. Every species they helped learned something about resilience, about hard choices, about the price of survival. And slowly the galaxy was changing because of it, becoming less fragile, more capable of facing real threats, learning that sometimes safety required accepting risk, that preservation required accepting destruction, that mercy sometimes looked like ruthlessness. The SOS to Earth had been answered. The price had been paid. And Kilar, standing on the homeworld of humanity for the first time, understood that this price, this terrible knowledge of what Deathworld survivors could and would do to protect life, was a price the galaxy needed to pay. Because the alternative was remaining weak, gentle, unprepared for real threats. And in a universe that contained things like the Scourge, weakness was a luxury no species could afford forever. As his shuttle lifted off from Earth's surface, fighting through storms and gravity, an atmosphere that would terrify any Venathi. Kilar watched the Deathworld shrink below him. Beautiful and terrible, gentle and harsh. A planet that had forged its inhabitants into survivors who carried both kindness and ruthlessness in their hearts. And he was grateful, truly grateful, that when his people had needed help, these particular survivors had answered the call. Even knowing the price, especially knowing the price, because some things were worth any cost, and survival was one of them. The message he would take back to his people was simple. Earth will help if you ask, but asking changes you. You see things you cannot unsee. You learn things you cannot unlearn. You understand the true meaning of survival, and that understanding is both gift and burden. Whether that trade is worthwhile depends on what you need to survive and what you are willing to become in order to do so. For the Venathi, it had been worthwhile. The children saved, the culture preserved, the species protected. All purchased with one burned colony and the knowledge that sometimes salvation comes from those willing to do what you cannot. That was the price. That had always been the price. And as long as species kept calling Earth in their darkest hours, it would remain the price. The only question was whether you were prepared to pay it. Looking back at the blue planet as it faded into the black of space, Kilar knew his answer. He would pay it again if he had to, because Deathworld survivors understood something fundamental that gentle species often forgot. Being alive was worth fighting for, and fighting meant accepting consequences that those who had never truly fought could not anticipate. Earth had taught him that. Captain Rodriguez and her team had taught him that, and now he would teach it to others, so that when the next crisis came and someone asked whether they should send an SOS to Earth, they would know exactly what they were asking for, exactly what it would cost, and exactly why, despite everything, it was worth it.